Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, I can hear myself, right, cool. So yeah, I'm Max, I'm a developer at Redbox, noted Vim user and rugby fan. And yeah, I'm going to talk about the present and future of front-end development in Magento 2. So I've spent kind of the past year or so doing a lot of talks about Magento 2's JavaScript, really digging deep into it, looking at it, because my experience was that no one else was. And it seemed like a really important thing for us to understand and know about. So first of all, an opening statement, if you will. I had a reference to the US Constitution, which now just makes me sad whenever I look at it. Front-end development revs itself faster than Magento can rev its front-end framework, right? I made a diagram to prove this point, right? We got, the orange is Magento, of course, right? We had the prototype era, and now we're in the knockout era. But in between there, we went through all manner of different things. And we don't even know what's going to be next. The one thing I can tell you is Magento 2 probably won't take advantage of it, because Magento 2, well, Magento in general, moves slower. And this is fine, right? The front-end framework will never be state-of-the-art. It just has to be good. And if you want to use the newest, coolest, hippest thing going, well, Magento, one of their biggest features was an entire API surface area that lets you do basically anything. So use that and do your own thing, right? But if you can't be up-to-date and modern, why have a front-end framework at all? Well, first of all, at a cultural level, the small shop, I think, is important to Magento. The idea that you can spin up on a shared hosting server an instance of Magento 2 and take orders and make money, I think to this day, as Magento goes towards the enterprise, is still important to them. That's why there is a default run mode, right? That's why there is an emulation mode for the full page cache. That's why they have got down less support instead of Sass, right? Because it can all be done inside PHP. And the second reason why it's important is that not everyone who's using Magento is optimizing for coolness, right? We are because we're nerds, but some of the bigger enterprise clients probably would rather have a guarantee that something's going to be around for longer than knowing that it's making us super happy, right? So what's going on right now, right? From Magento 1 to Magento 2, they completely rewrote the front-end framework, right? We left this era of prototype towards this require.js, knockout-y, jQuery, and a few other things kind of land. And I picked 4 basic quadrants that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give them a grade on each of these of how I think they're doing, and then I'm going to give some tips on where I think they can go. And my idea with this talk is that by the end of it, developers have an idea of what they should be looking at for the next year, 18 months, 2 years, of what's going to be a big technology. We're facing a deluge of new things every day, but maybe 3 or 4 of those might actually be important. So yeah, this is what I thought of them. Developer experience, right? I was not so favorable, and I'll give some reasons for that. Performance, right, gets a pass mark. You can make Magento 2 these days pretty quick on the front end, right? Capability, right, what can you actually achieve with what's built into the Magento 2 front end today? The answer is actually quite a lot. I have a few notes, but for the most part, they're pretty good. And security, also they get a pass mark. They're doing about as much as anyone else is in a similar sphere right now, but they could also be doing better. So, what's developer experience, right? Why do we invest time and money into it, right? Principally, it attracts developers to our platform, and it lets us build things faster. And developer time is expensive, so it's usually a good idea to make things be built faster. And my key metric for how good a developer experience is I think I got it from Vinay, when he's talking about testing, is minimizing your WTFs per minute, right? And right now, if you've ever used JavaScript in Magento 2, especially if you're doing stuff with a checkout, that might even be more than one, right? So, there's a few key technologies that I think are going to be big soon, right? The first one is Sass. Now, it's a CSS extension. It's similar to Less. And there was a lot of negative feedback from one or two people about Less and its suitability for Magento 2. Magento had good reasons for adopting Less. I mentioned it earlier, right? There is a PHP implementation of Less, and it runs in Magento, so you do not have to have Node.js or Ruby or something installed in your server. It just will build your site. But developers tend to prefer Sass, and with good reason, right? Sass is an actual language, has real constructs, it doesn't abuse the syntax of CSS, it extends it in a much better way. Sass is a lot quicker, and on my first Magento 2 project, felt like maybe 30% of my time was spent making a change and waiting for the style sheet to recompile. But the good news here, the silver lining, as there usually is these days, is that Magento noticed this, right? Snowdog, the Polish agency led by, this project was led by Bartek, developed a Magento blank theme implementation in Sass, showed that it smoked Magento, right? And also was nicer on a code level. They weren't doing crazy things to hack getting a responsive design build and having different breakpoints. This is now a core initiative, and that's great, and I think we should see more things like this, because we have ideas that sometimes Magento don't, or sometimes they misjudge things, and we do really have to tell them that. So Sass is not going away. In fact, Sass is going to become a lot bigger in the very short term, and I would recommend probably your next site build, try using the blank theme with Sass and see where it gets you. Now, I hinted at this a little bit, right? Magento introduced a build step to Magento front-end pipeline, right? But when it first came out, it was measured in minutes. Now, this is not acceptable. The Frontals project that was built by Snowdog can do it in a small number of seconds, which is still not perfect, but a hell of a lot better. And this is also something, to Magento's credit, they have noticed, and they are promising speed improvements in this exact area in the coming months. But this really does underpin quite a lot of other things. For example, right, I want to be able to run Grunt Watch in my console to get back to like web design when it was in the 90s, right? When I change a file and I reload my browser and it changed, right? This is amazing. Right? To anyone who started web design after 2005, this is like a whole new thing, but it's not really, right? It makes sense, right? I change a thing, I reload, and then it looks different. But with modern web development, this is actually quite hard, right? This didn't happen in Java, right? You edit some code, it changes, and then 15 minutes later you can view it. This is why we need compilation to be fast, because it gets us into a mode where we forget that we're actually working. We're just writing code at the same speed we're thinking at. I don't want a platform to hold me back. And this is also, this is happening, right? The next thing is ES6 support, which I've been pushing for a while. I've been trying out a few things. This talk got smaller, so I wanted to have a demo, but I didn't quite get there in time. Been busy as well. ES6 is the next generation of the JavaScript language, and it's important to pay attention to this kind of thing because it's a much better language, right? It's as if we were still using PHP 4 and then we magically got PHP 7. You've got constant variables, you've got native module support, you've got classes, which I don't like, you've got template strings, you've got object destructuring. There's a lot going on here. It is the big technology that's coming now, right? And if you're not involved with it, I suggest you read up. So, how do we build a new JavaScript language when the browsers don't necessarily support everything? Well, we compile it, right? so that we can use the new language and the browser still get the old things. And we package in some things like runtimes for promise support, for generators, etc. But the tool that does this compilation is by and large a tool called Babel, which is a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference, and is very easily integrated into Grunt or alternatively Gulp if you want to use the frontals. I had a go at this. It took me a few hours to get exactly right. Then I abandoned it. It's on my GitHub if anyone wants to look at it again. Now, another compilation step will make our build time slower and makes it more complex, but I think it's worth it. Because it's the future. We're not always going to have to compile it, first of all, and you get huge benefits in just the sensibility of a language. You get things like block scoping. You get better controls for managing asynchronous code, which is so much more important than it used to be as we start to build more ambitious applications. You also get the opening of better templating engines for building, modern JavaScript apps, including if it's in Knockout. So switching to the next quadrant, I gave, I think, a B on performance, right? Now, I don't have that much to say, right? Magento's doing okay at this, and they've given us and themselves all the tools we need to make this fast. Following on from what Tony was saying about maximizing your cache hits, right? Using Ajax for all of your customer data, right, to load it after the fact means you can just put an entire dump of HTML into Varnish and get it served straight away. This is amazing. This sees, in theory, 100% cache hits on everything that's public data. Magento are not doing this either, right? This is one of those cases where you can't do what we always did and look at the core because the core is not behaving itself, right? They do this in the customer dashboard, they do this in the minicart and the checkout, and they use it to great effect. But things like the swatches or the wish list, not so hot. Capability, right? They built this whole thing, but it's no use to anyone if you can't achieve what you need to for the next 3-5 years, right? We've got a track record on how long these systems are in place for. I know Knockout probably isn't going anywhere for the foreseeable future, right? It's possible to do really cool things with these frameworks. I've spent the past year playing with them. But there's a huge problem here. And it's one that needs to be addressed, right? Nobody's got a clue how it works. Now, the documentation is getting better, right? But there's more to that. Yes, we need documentation. Yes, we need training, which is now going to be free. We both individually and collectively need to build this expertise over time. And we need to learn to kill our old habits, including looking at the core, right? And most of all, we should be able to look at the core, right? Magento need to adopt their own goddamn best practices, right? I think now, I get it, right? They had a product to release, and I go off on this one a lot. There's something I think about a lot. They had a product to release, they've got limited resources, they nailed a lot of the framework, but I do honestly think that now the quality of some of their application code, particularly on the front end, is holding back the platform. And it's something that also I do see getting addressed more and more as time goes on. They seem to agree with me. Now, I got to check how long I've got left. Not that long. So my final quadrant is security, which I gave a B to again, right? They're doing basically everything right. I went to one of our sites that launched recently. I saw that everything was coming through HTTP2. It was all coming through SSL. It was great. Made me super happy. But there are some things that are coming down the pipe that I would love to support that I cannot right now because of things Magento has not done. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit. Who's heard of sub-resource integrity? Wow, like one guy. So the idea here is we get a hash, right, on a script tag, and we download this script and we hash it using the same algorithm they give us. If the hashes match, all good. We execute the file. If they don't match, then we don't run it. We say, no, we throw an error to the console, and your site breaks, but your user is safe. So what does this guarantee you, right? It guarantees you the safety of the code. Well, it guarantees that the code you deploy is the same code you get, right? So what this principally protects against is CDN breaches. We're all using CDNs these days. And it's possible that someone could exploit your site by modifying what's served through your CDN. But unless you also have this hash map modified as well, that's not going to fly. And this, it turns out, is actually quite difficult to beat. So Magento can support this, in theory, right? We have a build step. Everything that's in pub static, every JavaScript file, we hash and we put that into a hash map. And then we serve that hash map to the front end. We hash that file too, by the way, so that you don't have that vulnerability there. So you hash that file, you serve that, then we have a hash map on the front end that require.js can check. Require.js has a on-node created hook, right? So we add this integrity attribute. When we load a file with require.js, we look it up in the map, and then we're good to go. But there is one fatal flaw here. The version of require.js that Magento has in their library is so old, it doesn't have this. This hook was added on the 8th of June, 2015. Right? The version of require.js that is in Magento 2 core right now was released in 2014. Now, while we're on topic of security, the first rule in security is keeping your software up to date, and that includes the JavaScript libraries that are statically bundled in with the project, right? They don't come through Composer, they don't come through NPM, they're just there, right? And they need a bit more love, right? They should be more modern. You can patch this yourself, by the way, in your own module, but you shouldn't have to. This gets us to like 99% of having things sub-resource integrity, right? Because they didn't address the use case of loading a script in the layout XML. I don't think I'm bothered with that because you should never do that. Everything should be coming through asynchronously through JavaScript components, through deps and require.js config. I did do a talk about this in Poland that I'd be happy to refer you to because we're not talking about code here today. The next part of security is a thing called Content Security Policy, or CSP. Who's heard of this one? Anyone? A few more people, that's good. This is going to be, in the same way that the same origin policy was a big bugbear for us in the previous decade, right, with, AJAX request randomly breaking. This is hopefully going to be exactly the same thing because it is, if it's getting in our way, it means we're using it. It's a special HTTP header that essentially tells a browser where it's allowed to load different static assets from. So you get a list of comma-separated hosts for JavaScript, for CSS, for images, for everything. And this, in addition to sub-resource integrity, lets you really nail down your site even more. And these two together basically destroy all known avenues of cross-site scripting. You basically now have to have some kind of access to the server or SQL injection attack to get an exploit in, which are all things we should fix too, right? We can get to 100% CSP in Magento, and I would love to see this happen. Because it's just an HTTP header, anything that doesn't support it, which most browsers do now, by the way, we'll just ignore it and just run it like a normal website, yeah? But there's one huge thing we have to do first, right? We have to get rid of every single inline script in Magento 2, because that won't work with content security policy. The idea is basically that an inline script, content security policy validates the source of every single executable piece of code it runs. An inline script is essentially just HTML. It can't verify the location of that. It could have come from anywhere, right? It could come from some customer entering their name wrong, right? Wrong, deliberately wrong with a script tag in there, right? They don't support it. It's too risky. This includes all the inline calls to require, which I see in the core, which I see in Stack Exchange answers, which I see my colleagues doing sometimes, and I tell them off, right? It's not, it hurts me, but I find it a personal insult when I see an inline script tag, right? The next thing to do is add a configuration field for your allowed hosts, because sometimes merchants, customers, etc., add their own JavaScript that comes from somewhere else. It has to be configurable. And then you just send it as a header in every request. Easy, right? That first bullet point is a huge amount of effort from what I've seen in the core. So that's my really quick roundup, right? We looked at SaaS, ES6, sub-resource integrity, content security policy, with an additional reminder that for the future is not all React. The future is probably Knockout.js for Magento. The future is using the APIs. And maybe one day we can get a templating engine in there that's not PHP as well. That's all I've got time for, I think. So thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, I would be more than happy to try and answer them.
Any questions for Max?
No one. I answered everyone's question implicitly. Perfect talk.
Yes. Very good.
Well.
Right. That was not so painful. Thank you.